Yeah, there's never a boring day in the Army. I can say that.
Welcome to the Vet Life Reimagined podcast, where we learn about all the amazing things you can do in this wonderful veterinary profession and how to find the vet life you love. Ironically, this episode falls on the Monday after Veterans Day, so I want to thank all of those who have served to protect us. And that's people and animals. Anywhere animals go, veterinarians will go. I saw a post asking to learn more about being a veterinarian in the military, so I went to my vet school classmate, Dr. Sarah Sulkosky, who has served 8 years in the Army, to talk about her career in the military. My understanding of the military is very limited, so I sought out lots of feedback for questions. So this conversation includes me pulling from those very questions. It is fascinating to learn about this career path and the impressive animals that are here as well. A lot of the questions were about military working dogs, so get excited. Don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe to catch all of these stories and conversations. I have a lot in store for you. Now, on to the episode. This will be my first time when I have a list of questions from the audience.
Okay.
We'll see how this goes, this format.
Sure.
But really, just like everybody else, or when did you know when you wanted just to get into veterinary medicine in general?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I always loved animals. I always thought, hey, I'd like to be a veterinarian, but I never really had the confidence to do it. And so when I was in undergrad, I actually majored in different things. I initially went to school for mathematics. So my undergraduate degree is in traditional mathematics, very theoretical stuff, very nerdy stuff. And I really loved the French language as well. So I got a second major in international studies and minor in French. Did some study abroad programs, really had fun, and really got to see a lot. But I still was kind of interested in veterinary medicine. So I got a job working at a veterinary clinic. Really great job for a great veterinarian who took me under his wing, gave me a lot of education and experience and convinced me that I could do it. So after doing a lot of other things, I did ultimately decide to apply for vet school and got in, and the rest is history, as you know, because we graduated together. So yeah, so it's kind of a long, circuitous route, but that's ultimately where I ended up. So.
Well, that's fascinating. Have you ever had to or been able to pull out your French again?
Yes, actually, because I was stationed in Germany for 3 years, and a large part of the veterinary mission in the Army is to make sure that the food source is safe and secure. So anytime we are overseas or anything like that, we do a lot of food inspection missions. So food that's brought onto the base, we're going to actually go to the production facility and do a general inspection. So I did a lot of those in France and was able to use those language skills.
Oh, well, very interesting. So when you were going into vet school, had you already decided that you wanted to work with the military as a vet?
Hadn't. I'd thought about it, but I had just gotten married as well. And I was a military kid. So I knew the stresses that the military can put on your family. And I just didn't think that was going to be something that my husband would be up for. So I'd kind of put that on the back burner. But once I got in and truly realized the amount of debt that veterinarians take on during vet school, started really thinking about ways that I could finance that, more than just taking out student loans. And so I brought the subject up with my husband about potentially serving in the Army, and surprisingly, he was incredibly supportive. So then we just decided, okay, let's see if I can get in once he was on board.
Okay. So were you like in your first year when you decided? At one point had you decided to make that contract?
Yeah, so we pretty much decided when I was in first year, and then the Army has a program called the Health Profession Scholarship Program. So it's not just for veterinary school, it's for dentistry, it's for nursing. There's a lot of different programs that you can use the HPSB for. And for veterinarians, they offered 3 and 2 year scholarships. So I applied for a 3 year scholarship during my first year, didn't end up getting it. I think it was highly competitive that year because there were 3 of us at our school that applied and none of us got it. And then the second year of veterinary school, I applied again to get the 2 year scholarship and got it that go around.
Okay, so the scholarship is paying for the veterinary school part of it, correct?
Yeah, so they covered tuition, they covered books, and then they give you a stipend for living, which covers the cost of housing, the cost of food, pretty much ensures that you really don't need to take out a student loan while you have the HPSB scholarship.
Oh, wow. Okay. And so what do you have to do in order to get that scholarship?
It's a pretty competitive thing because you're applying for, a scholarship, but you also have to meet all of the qualifications to join the Army. And anybody that's interested in this, I would highly recommend talking to a medical specific recruiter because there's a lot of details that I don't know and that change year to year. But there's background checks that have to be done, medical screening, that kind of stuff all has to be done. And in addition to applying for the academic portion, which involves letters of recommendation, statements of interest, that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty involved process. And then if you do get the scholarship, then there's a lot more that you have to do afterwards to essentially put you into the ready reserves. That's where you would be during veterinary school.
Okay. With the scholarship, how many years are you basically dedicating to the service when you get those scholarships?
Yeah, it varies depending on how long your scholarship is, and then just depending on what assignments you take afterwards, I believe. But in general, I think I owed 3 years, but that did not count the internship year that I had in the Army right after graduation. So altogether, I had 4 years that I owed. And that's initially when I joined, I was like, okay, 4 years and I'm done. Then I'm going to move on to other things. Clearly, that did not happen because I've been in for 8 years now and just continuing to take it one assignment at a time.
Oh, well, I mean, that speaks volumes. So
Mhm.
when you're signing up for the military, do you get to pick the types of animals you work with? Because this will be a question as well. What type of
Mhm.
animals might you work with in the military? And does that kind of guide you when you're in veterinary school on like if you track or your focuses?
Yeah, there is not really the opportunity to decide specifically what you want to work on.
Okay.
There are a few assignments, if you are one of the lucky few and you try really hard and network well, where you can get the opportunity to, say, work with military working equines or work with marine mammals. But in general, you need to be prepared as a military veterinarian to treat a lot of military working dogs and then privately owned pets, so dogs and cats. And then if you're comfortable with it, in your clinic, you can decide to treat avians, you can decide to treat, reptiles, pocket pets, but that's at your discretion in your clinic. So
Okay. So would that be on a base then?
yeah. So just to give you a little background, like typically when you come into the Army, most of the new graduates, they put into a 1-year internship program called First Year Graduate Veterinary Education, or FIGV. There are 4 different sites around the US that offer these programs. I was in the one at Fort Belvoir, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. in Virginia. We had a really, really heavy military working dog mission, really busy food mission, but you're there with a few other interns and you have 2 senior mentors essentially. So I worked with a clinical specialist who is a surgeon and a public health specialist, and they guided us through how do I be an efficient, effective veterinary corps officer. That's what you did for the first year. And then after that, you can go anywhere in the world where we have a military base essentially, because all of the veterinarians in the military are Army. We are the executive service for the Department of Defense for veterinary care. So we go to Navy bases, we go to Marine Corps bases, Air Force. So you might be assigned to one of those bases, and then your job there is to run the veterinary service mission, which involves running the veterinary clinic, but also running the food protection mission. So depending on the service, you may be a little bit more involved doing inspections on the dining facilities or galleys, doing inspections on the commissaries, going out into the civilian community and inspecting any potentially hazardous foods that are going to be brought onto the base, like dairy operations or slaughterhouses. And when I was in Japan, I did a lot of bakeries as well. And in that sense, that's if you're stationed on a military base providing veterinary services specifically for that base. There's another way you can kind of track. You can go into an operational environment, which is where you're assigned to a deployable unit. And essentially at that point, you're put with a team and you're just preparing to deploy to go downrange, potentially like when OEF and OIF were going on, going into the Middle East and providing care for the military working dogs that were deployed there, or providing food protection to that area. So making sure that we have a good way to get bottled water to our troops who are, fighting on the ground there. So those are kind of the 2 ways that you can go as a veterinarian first coming in. They can look very different as well based on your assignment.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of interesting. Did that appeal to you, the diversity of things you would get to do?
Yeah, there's never a boring day in the Army. I can say that. The thought of deploying can be really hard for some people, though, especially if you have a family. You're thinking about being gone for 6 months to 18 months, and you might be in a really austere environment. That is something that you kind of have to be prepared for. It might happen even if you don't want it to, as a veterinarian in the Army, if the Army needs you to do that, that's going to be your job.
Now, you are a mom, correct?
I am, yeah. I have a almost 3-year-old at home.
Uh, well, being a parent comes up sometimes in my conversations with veterinarians. What was that like in trying to make career decisions, but at the same time,
Mhm.
make family decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a struggle for anybody, but I think the Army is really amazing in how I think we're really progressive with our culture and protecting the rights of individuals and the rights of women who want to be parents and supporting them as well. Since I have been in the Army, I have seen some really awesome changes happen. So when I first joined, we had only 6 weeks of maternity leave. Now they've increased it to 12 or maybe 14 weeks of maternity leave, which is just amazing. They've done similar things for fathers as well. So fathers now get more paternity leave. So the Army in general has been very supportive. I also feel very good about my healthcare in the Army. That's one of the big reasons why we've stayed, is because of financial stability, but also because of the healthcare that we get. I've been very supported that way as well. We actually had our baby girl in Germany, and we had her on base at Launchstuhl. I had a very great experience there, a very good group of providers. But it is tough. And I know any mom knows, there's never a good time to have a baby. It always feels like you're going to have to put your career on hold, and that your employer might, hold it against you or feel like you're not providing enough. And it is a struggle. I felt like I wasn't doing enough for my team at certain points, but in general, everybody around me was super supportive. My commander at the time was an OBGYN nurse. So she was like super supportive and super down with it, and,
Nice.
made sure that I was taking care of myself. It was stressful, but I was supported the whole way through.
Yeah. Well, that brings up another question too. You don't think about working with someone of that background as
Mhm.
veterinarians. We're pretty much surrounded by a lot of veterinarians, or
Yeah.
the veterinary community. What was it like working with lots of different people with different backgrounds, and more specifically, can you describe some of the different backgrounds you got to work with?
Yeah, so my first few commanders were actually veterinarians. And then my third or fourth commander, she was an OBGYN nurse. And then my commander after that was a nutritionist, actually.
Nice.
So it was, yeah, very, very different every time. But it's really amazing the skills that these folks bring along into that role as a commander. They're there to lead people and to lead an organization. They're not there to run the clinic. This is specifically on the clinical side because I have not been a part of a deployable unit. That's a little bit of a different story. But on the clinical side of one veterinary command, which we call public health command, might have maybe 10 to 12 veterinary clinics falling under it. So like in Germany, we had, 11, was it 11? Now I can't remember. I should really remember how many clinics we had. But we had clinics throughout Germany, and then one in Belgium as well. And then our headquarters, our commander there was just kind of in charge of making sure that all those clinics were running smoothly, and then just taking care of the people, making sure everybody was getting the training that they needed, making sure that they were medically ready, making sure that we were meeting the needs of our stakeholders throughout Europe. So all of these bases were getting what they needed, and that we're supporting the warfighter in the right way. And so having a really diverse group of people that are able to come together and make sure that we're getting the mission done, I think that diversity really, really comes in handy. In the medical field, as veterinarians, we are really highly integrated, I think. We don't just kind of stand off to the side and, treat some dogs and then go home for the day. When I was on a Navy base, we were there at the installation meetings with the installation commander every week, but also really heavily involved with the branch health clinic, so the medical side. They would help us out if we needed some diagnostics that I couldn't get done in my clinic, but also anytime they had a public health concern, a rabies, a potential dog bite wound or something like that, they would reach out to us for assistance as well. So we're really integrated that way. And then having, the other specialties coming in and leading veterinary organizations really gives us the opportunity to learn from their expertise as well.
Yes. And along with probably learning different skills and techniques, what about leadership too? I would think that you get, or at least I hope you get some leadership training. We talk about this with all veterinarians, right? As soon as you leave, you're a leader. And so what kind of leadership training and learnings did you get so far from the military?
Yeah, that's really emphasized in the Army. And that's what the Army needs us to do. We call ourselves green suiters. So when we're wearing the uniform, it's green camo. So that's the reason that, the Army has green suiters. If they just needed veterinarians that were able to treat animals, we could hire contractors to do that, or we could have civilians doing that. They want people that are able to lead organizations as well. And so they really focus on that from the very beginning. In the initial basic officer leadership course, they're sitting you down and they're showing you, this is the Army model of leadership, and it's a very well developed model. And they go into some of the theoretical stuff, but they also really go into the practical stuff as well, as far as like, how to check in with your team, how often you need to check in with your team, how to provide feedback, and they emphasize that very regularly. So any sort of professional training that we go to, so typically at every rank there's going to be a professional school that you need to go to. So as a captain, it's called Captain's Career Course. As a major, it's called ILE, and I don't remember exactly what ILE stands for, but they have a specific course in ILE that's just on leadership and how do you effectively lead an organization. And then in addition to the standardized professional training, every commander kind of takes it on themselves to make sure that they're doing leader professional development, typically on a weekly to monthly basis with all of their officers as well. And that can take a lot of different forms. Sometimes we would have book clubs where we would read leadership books and then come together and discuss. Sometimes it was, let's learn about the career progression for our 68 Romeos or our 68 Tangos, and how are we involved in that? How do we get them to succeed? So a lot of different ways, and it's done in both professional and just kind of one-on-one with the commander or semi-formal training environments.
Well, that's really interesting. And can you say what a Romeo or a tango is?
Yeah. So those are our right and left hands, essentially. So the 68 Tangos are veterinary technicians, and then 68 Romeos are our food safety specialists, food inspection specialists.
Oh, okay. Very interesting.
Mhm.
So what would be one of the most important leadership skills that you have discovered so far? And can you tell a story to emphasize this particular characteristic?
Oh, that's, it might take me some time to think about a story, but definitely the biggest thing is communication,
Mm.
especially in the Army. When I was in Japan, it was me and my team of 8 soldiers and civilians, and my commander was a 12-hour train ride away. We were the only Army on the island that we were on. So it was very isolated, but definitely communication is going to make sure that our commander is tracking what we're doing and that our commander is supporting or redirecting whatever our efforts are, because we are very spread out.
Communication is huge. I think everybody can agree on that. And I think it's something that hopefully the military does really well because you have to, like you said, you're
Mhm.
spread out and you have to be able to have very clear, clean communication as much as possible. And Simon Sinek is someone I follow, and he really respects the military when it also comes to teamwork and how you see each other. And I think communication plays a role of that. But if you want to go from a different angle, feel free. How have you seen the relationship between you and your team?
I think it's very important that we recognize that we are a team and that it can be tough when we talk about big army, and big army is kind of the non-medical army, where these are the actual war fighters, these are the soldiers that are out there doing the mission, and we're here to support them. So in big army there are very strictly enforced rank hierarchies, and that's part of our doctrine, is that officers and enlisted, there's no fraternization. There's a very strict rank protocol, very It's very big in respect. But when we're out and there's only 8 of us on the island, and there are there were Navy in Japan as well. There were a lot of sailors there, but my team, it was just 8 of us. So it was 1 officer and 6 enlisted and 1 Japanese civilian. So we got a lot closer, I think, than you would see in the big army with the officer and the enlisted ranks. And so it was really important for us to work as a team and to make sure that we were supporting each other, especially because we were so isolated and so far away from our families. It would take 14 hours of flight time to get home with our families. So we had to maintain, the proper Army protocols and proper Army respect and all that kind of stuff. But we also needed to come together as a family to support each other in our personal lives and make sure that we were all getting taken care of and all of our needs are getting met, and also getting the mission done. So it's a very different dynamic in that kind of environment.
Clinics, veterinary clinics, in a non-military setting, in a way, you still have a mission and you still have to work very well as a team. So what is something you think that the military does well in how you live out being a veterinarian that you feel would be helpful to, non-military clinical settings?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we do really, really well is empowering the individual. And that's becoming more and more a central focus of our doctrine as well. But making sure that each person is individually trained and competent and able to get their tasks completed. So, for instance, in Japan, we handled a lot of the food inspection missions on the Navy ships. And so my soldiers would be going onto those ships and conducting food assessments while I'm in the clinic seeing a working dog. And they needed to be trained and competent to look at those food items, to look at the MREs or whatever their inspection was for the day, and to make that judgment and to communicate that to the sailors that they were working with. And then if they needed any assistance or they needed backup, they could always come back to me. We could find out the answer together. I could give them support in whatever help or whatever way they needed it. But they really needed to be independent and able to make those assessments on their own so that we could get the entire mission done. Similarly, my 68 Tango, or my technician, she was amazing. The technician that I had in Japan, really good self-starter, very well trained. I would go on a lot of missions. So I would go down to Okinawa regularly and be away from the clinic. I would go to the Philippines for several weeks at a time, and she would be at that clinic by herself. We had some civilian staff there as well, but there was no veterinarian. And so if we had a military working dog emergency, it was on her to do the triage, to do the assessment, and then to either give, if I was available, give me a call and I could talk her through, this is what our next step is, or we need to get this dog off base to a Japanese veterinarian, or she could call my boss to do the same if I wasn't available. So she was very well trained, and that's, the best 68 Tangos that we have are able to do that, are able to operate independently. And so that's one of the things that we really do well, is making sure that every individual on our staff, maybe not right when they first join the Army, but our job is to train them to get them to that point where they can operate independently and be empowered to do so.
People who are interested in that nurse practitioner role in the veterinary medicine will be very intrigued by that, I think. So interesting. Okay. Well, let me go to some of the questions that I got when I went to a Reddit. I was like, so if you got to ask a military veterinarian questions, what would you ask? And so here were some of the ones they asked. Advising those who may be interested in pursuing a path in the military, what are some pros and cons to be cognizant of to see if it's a good path for them?
That is an excellent question. And I think a lot of the pros are also some of the cons. So starting with some of those, travel is a big one of those. That is a huge pro. Two of my assignments were overseas assignments. So I spent 3 years in Japan and 3 years in Germany. Those were great ways to travel, both in an official capacity, but also a great starting point for some fun family vacations. So that's a pro, but that's also a con, because there was a lot of time when I was gone from my family. I was going on temporary duty assignments, for weeks at a time. Thankfully, I didn't have any kids at that point in time, but if you do have small children, that can be tough, being away from them, especially with, if your spouse is at home and you don't have a support system there, your family's pretty far away. So that can be both a pro and a con. The financial side is definitely a pro. I think that you can find more lucrative positions potentially in private practice if you're lucky, but having financial stability, knowing that, I'm going to have my housing paid for, I've got health insurance, my family's going to be taken care of that way, that's definitely a pro as well. But probably one of the biggest cons is going to be the stress that's put on your family from moving so often. Moving is one of the most stressful things that can happen in your life. I think it's like the third most stressful thing I've heard, aside from, getting married and having a baby, maybe.
I think it's divorce and death. So,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a couple more things that can happen that are more stressful, but moving is a very stressful event. I didn't think twice about it because we grew up moving all the time. So I hadn't thought about it. Now that I'm an adult and a parent, I see how stressful it is. And it's especially stressful on my husband, who also is a professional, and rolling the dice to see, am I going to have to restart my career in this new place that we move every time? That's a lot to ask for him. And so it's definitely potential stress and something to consider. And anybody's decision to join the military should be, if you're married, should be a joint decision, a family decision. It's not just an individual decision. One of the biggest pros that keeps people in the Army is the opportunity for residencies and for specialization. So after you're in for, depending on what your assignments are, it can be anywhere from 4 to 6 years, you're eligible to sign up for or to apply for what they call long-term health education and training. In the Veterinary Corps, we have 4 different specializations that you can do. And if you want to stay in past, I think it's 10 or 12 years, you actually have to specialize. You can't just stay as a general practitioner. The 4 that we have are public health specialist, laboratory animal specialist, pathologist, and a clinical specialist. And underneath the clinical specialty, we have internists, we have criticalists, we have surgeons, we have a few behaviorists, and then on the reserve side, I think we have a couple of other specialties as well. As a veterinarian in the Army, once you've done, a certain number of assignments, you can apply for one of those. And you go into those programs as an officer in the Army. So you maintain your officer paycheck and your housing and your health insurance, all those kinds of things as well. So it's a very, very big incentive to stay in the Army, is to get that training.
Yeah. And so you said you've been in 8 years now. So you're qualified. Did you apply for a specialty? What did you
decide? So I decided to go into pathology. Army has a really excellent veterinary pathology residency, part of the DoD's Joint Pathology Center. Very long history of this organization. It used to be the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which has been around for a very long time. I think it might be the oldest veterinary pathology residency that exists. I might be wrong on that. I got to do some research, be a better pathologist within the JPC. But we have a really great program. And as a pathologist in the Army, even those that are the highest ranking pathologists, 06s or full bird colonels, they get to enjoy doing their practice every day. So even if they're, running an organization like the director for veterinary pathology at the Joint Pathology Center, he still reads slides half of the day. So it's a really interesting thing. At other specialties, it's kind of hit or miss. You might be more in an administrative role, something like that. But I decided to go veterinary pathology, and I got in. And now I'm in my 2nd year of residency. So I'll finish up in a little less than 2 years.
Oh, well, congratulations. And it's exciting. I love career pathing because that's, one of the reasons for this podcast. As you are finishing up your residency, do you want to go to colonel? What do you kind of see your path looking like in the future?
Yeah, I want to try to stay in for 20 years. That's my goal. At 20 years, you can fully retire. But honestly, when you're in the military, you can have the best laid plans, but sometimes they just don't go to plan. So it's best to, plan it out, but then take it one assignment at a time, because there's never, something might come up where I just decide military is not the right thing for my family right now, or maybe at a certain point, if I have some medical issue come up where I'm not qualified for military service anymore, that's always something that I've got to keep in the back of my mind. But right now, I would love to stay in for 20 years. I would love to get to colonel. I would love to run one of the fantastic research organizations that we have.
Interesting. Well, since you said that about leaving, someone did ask a question
Mhm.
about leaving as a CPT. So first of all, what's a
Yeah,
CPT and
sure.
what does that entail leaving?
CPT is just a rank. It's a captain.
Oh,
So
okay.
when you're commissioned into the Army as a veterinarian, you're commissioned as a captain, which is
Okay.
pretty amazing. My dad was Air Force, not medical, and he just was blown away the fact that I could come in as a captain and not have to be a lieutenant first. He just thought that was the craziest thing in the world. But a lot of people who join the Army will do their obligation, 1 or 2 assignments, and then decide, you know what, I've done my service. Now I want to try things out in the civilian world. And so they can get out, after that initial obligation is complete, which might be 3 or 4 years. And so they would be getting out as a captain.
Okay. You mentioned that the Tangos and Romeos, they sounded very well trained. And for them, do you feel like they are also given a lot of opportunities for growth and development as well?
I think that they are. Unfortunately, and I think this is true for the officers as well. Some of it is going to be command dependent and mission dependent. So there are a lot of really amazing schools that we offer for our Romeos and for our Tangos and for our veterinary corps officers as well. It's not guaranteed that you're going to get to go to that school the first time or the second time or the third time that you apply. It really is a little bit dependent on the mission, on if we can afford to lose that person for that amount of time, if there's funding available to get them into that school, because, when we're in Japan, we're talking about sending a soldier back to Texas for training. That's going to cost the activity or our battalion $3,000 to do that training. So is it in the budget? A good commander is going to be able to balance all of those things and make sure that the training is equitable, especially when we're in those faraway locations. So I think it's a little bit dependent on the location and the command that you have. But in general, yes, I think that they are very well trained, and that there are a lot of really excellent opportunities out there.
Excellent. This question came from another military vet, and they said they would love to ask which service was your favorite to work with?
Oh, that's a great question. I've gotten to work with all of the services except for the Coast Guard in varying capacities. The ones that I have worked with most closely, probably the Army and the Navy, but I've worked a little bit with the Marines and a little bit with the Air Force. They all have wonderful people, wonderful military working dogs. The Air Force is really fun when you're on an Air Force base because they do their own food inspection. So as a veterinarian, that frees you up to spend more time in your clinic. Whereas on any other base, you're going to spend a lot more time managing the food inspection mission. That being said, my favorite to work with is probably the Navy. There's a lot of reasons for that. After I did my first assignment outside of DC, which is, very close to what we call the flagpole, where all the really important people are really busy. It's like, okay, send me as far away from here as you possibly can. So they sent me to a Navy base in Japan where they'd never had an Army officer stationed before and said, okay, set up a clinic and get those military working dogs care. So okay, so it was really really fun to just kind of hit the ground and build from the ground up. We did have a small clinic that we started with, and the Army veterinarians and like the local islands had come and visited often to provide the working dogs care, but I was the first one to be stationed there. So to be able to set up that relationship with the installation and with the working dog kennels was just really, really rewarding. Also, the Navy bases are just the most beautiful places to work because they're always on the water. They always have these big, beautiful ships, and Japan is just gorgeous and a lovely community to be a part of. But the handlers were really great as well. And I'm not sure how it goes in all of the services, but in the Navy, before you can become a military working dog handler, you have to be a MP first, what they call an MA or military police officer. And you have to be selected to be able to become a working dog handler. And you are selected to do that by showing that, one, you're the best of the best, and two, by volunteering all of your extra time to help care for the working dogs. So you really show that you can do it and that you want to do it before they'll pick you up and they'll send you to handler school and give you a dog. So all of the military working dog handlers that I worked with in the Navy were just amazing, very well trained, had great relationships with their dogs, really prioritized the medical care, never had any issues with compliance, just a wonderful experience to have, especially as a new veterinarian. And then I didn't quite have a clinic yet, just a really small space to work out of. So I relied heavily on the local Navy Health Clinic, and they were so supportive as well, letting me take x-rays or use their ultrasound or giving me supplies that I needed, anything we needed to take care of those working dogs, because they viewed those working dogs as sailors, not as animals or pets. So it was just a really fulfilling assignment to have, where I felt like I made a really big difference.
Oh, wow. One of the things I love so much, and I'm not a crier, but I see a picture of like a military soldier, and you can just see how much love and respect for their dog. Can you describe a little bit of that human animal bond that you've been able to witness?
Yeah, when it comes to working dogs, I mean, the relationship that they have is pretty amazing, and they train together all the time. When they're in garrison or on the installation, the working dog stays in the military working dog kennels. The handler comes and picks them up every day. They do their shift together, they train together, and then the animal goes back to the kennels for the night. When they're deployed, they deploy together, and that dog stays with the handler all the time. So they can get really close. And it's very, very heartwarming to see how close they can get. I remember after having some anesthetic procedures that we did on some of the Marine Corps dogs in Okinawa, I'd walk into the recovery kennels to see how everything's doing, and the military working dog handler is sleeping down in the run right next to his military working dog. So it's just really heartwarming to see how close that they grow to each other during all of their deployments and all of their assignments, on the installation.
Oh, wow. The dogs, I mean, they're treated like soldiers, they're trained like soldiers.
Mhm.
What happens when they retire? And what might indicate a time, okay, this dog is ready to retire?
Yeah. So when we retire a dog, we call it dispoing. I don't know why we say dispo, but they are dispositioned when they are retired out of the Army or whatever service that they're in. A lot of the reasons why they might be dispoed are medical reasons, and so we're heavily involved in any of the retirement process, any of the processes that go on. But medical reasons might include things like osteoarthritis, maybe if they have had a heat injury or something like that, which makes them not able to work as hard. Those types of things will push us to put them in for retirement. They can also have behavioral issues, or potentially just they're tired of working, if they have decreased work drive. A lot of times that happens with age too. We don't have like a set cutoff for age when they have to retire, but a lot of times when they get older, their work drive just kind of decreases. And so then we might do what's called a training disposition, where, okay, there's nothing medically wrong with them, but they're just not working out as a working dog anymore. So they should be a pet dog. Most of the animals that are retired or dispoed out of the military are adopted out, and there's a really almost competitive hierarchy on who gets to adopt the working dogs. So typically the first person in line is going to be the current handler, and then the second person in line might be previous handlers. And then after that, it's, veterinary staff, the people that work with the dog all the time and love the dog. In a few situations, we might deem that the dog might be a little bit too dangerous, because these dogs are trained to be police dogs. And so they might not be a great fit for any type of owner. So we might have to be very specific on who they can go home to. Might say, okay, this family can't have any kids, or we might say this isn't going to be a good pet dog at all. They might be really dangerous. That is very uncommon for that to happen. It is very rare, but sometimes we do have to euthanize if they are going to be really dangerous animals that we can't release out of the military. There are some nonprofit organizations that are wonderful that have offered homes for some of these dogs as well. So it's not often that we have to do that, but that is one possible eventuality. Vast majority get to go home, and we say that we're transferring them to Fort Couch so that they can become couch potatoes.
I like that, for a couch.
Yeah.
And so is the retirement, is that a decision between the handler and then you or the veterinary staff?
Usually it goes with the kennel master. So there's one kennel master per kennel, usually senior enlisted person. And then the veterinarian has a role as far as doing a medical workup, writing a memo stating, especially if we're displaying them for training reasons, making sure that there's not a medical reason that they're not working, making sure like ruling out like hypothyroidism, things like that, or chronic pain, things that we can do something about. So we write a memorandum as well. And then the clinical specialist who falls over us at some level is going to have a say in that process as well as, and then I think the program manager who manages all of the working dogs for that service is going to have a say in that as well. So everybody comes together to make the best decision for the dog. And then I think the installation commander has the final say. So a lot of people involved in that process.
Yeah. You mentioned that dogs can have some behavioral problems, or they're just like, I'm ready to retire. Thank you. Uh, but can dogs also get post-traumatic stress disorder as well?
Yes, they can. And I think there's been a lot of research done in the past 10 to 20 years, especially with all the engagements in the Middle East regarding canine PTSD. We're really fortunate in that in the Army, we have several trained board certified behaviorists. And so they've really worked to put together a program where anytime a dog deploys, when they come back, they have a post-deployment exam where we look for any sort of medical issues, but we also screen them for post-traumatic stress disorder. And if we identify that the dog might have it, then there are set protocols that we would do. We would reach out to the behaviorists that we have on staff and set up the best plan for the dog, which typically involves some sort of anxiolytic medication, as well as a lot of behavioral therapy for the animal as well. We really work to try to get them over that so that's not something that they experience long term.
Okay, so sometimes they recover, they can go back into service, but then I'm assuming some may not.
Mm-hmm. Some may not. And so if they don't, then it might be sometime where we have to consider limiting their duty assignments or changing their status, saying they're maybe not deployable anymore. They have to stay in a certain type of environment. But then there's also the possibility that we will recommend them for retirement at that point.
Right. Okay. So when you were going over some of the specialties, I was like, oh, you need a nutritionist, but that's just me being biased.
Yeah.
We did get a question around nutrition. The question was, how do you feel about the nutrition and medical care the MWDs get? And is there anything you would change?
That is a great question. And it might be a loaded question. I don't know how much I can critique my own service on a public interview. But I think that we offer great nutrition and medical care for military working dogs. And that's something every person that joins the Army as a veterinarian joins because they want to provide care for military working dogs. And that's always our number one priority. And there's never any question about it. If we have or two items come up and one is military working dog care and there's something else, it's always going to be military working dog care first. So that is something that we pride ourselves on a lot. I think nutrition is great. We typically feed a standardized diet. That way dogs that transfer between kennels aren't getting, any sort of gastrointestinal upset from changing diets. And we are able to pretty well provide any sort of prescription diets that the dogs might need. If there's anything that I would change, and I think that this would be universal across all veterinary clinics, regardless of if they're military or not, is just staffing. Staffing can be an issue, and we typically have veterinarians where we need them. Having the support staff for veterinarians can be a struggle. We have our 68 tangos who are the enlisted veterinary technicians, and typically they're co-assigned with the veterinarians, but then we also heavily rely on civilians as well. And so we try to hire civilian support staff to be veterinary technicians, to be receptionists, those types of things to help our clinics run. And when we don't have those positions filled, that can really impact us and take our focus off of the military working dog care and just trying to keep our clinic functioning, keeping the doors open and medications on the shelves so that we can provide the working dogs care. Hiring is an issue everywhere, I know. It seems to be a little bit worse in the Army sometimes just because, when we're overseas, trying to find somebody within our local community that we can hire that meets the standards that we have for a U.S. veterinary clinic, can be a little bit difficult. And then federal hiring always takes, a lot longer than you think it should be. So that is a little bit of a struggle. That being said, like I said, we always put military working dog care first. So if a military working dog needs something, it doesn't matter if we're short-staffed, we just refocus the staff that we have to focus on that working dog.
Yeah. Actually brings up, do you use telehealth in the Army? And are
Yeah.
you able to reach out to maybe specialists that you don't normally staff? You mentioned
Mhm.
potential contractors. How would that work?
Yeah, we do have telehealth, and it's super important for us, especially when we're talking about deployment of animals and working dog teams into austere environments where we don't have veterinary providers. And so one amazing service that we have, and I don't remember the name of it, but we have a hotline that is constantly staffed by clinical specialists. And so when our military working dog handlers and those teams go out into these really austere environments, they always have access to be able to call one of our specialists to get answers to whatever questions that they have. If they have an injury or anything like that, they're going to have a specialist on the line talking, their medic or whoever they have with them through military working dog care in that kind of environment. So that is one of the ways that we use telehealth. When COVID happened, we also set up the opportunity to do telehealth just with our pets as well. I don't know how much it was used. I think a lot of clinics actually just went curbside instead, but we did have the capability of doing virtual appointments with our owners and their pets. So that was possible as well. But just in general, because we're so spread out, like when I was stationed in Japan, I had access to a clinical specialist, but he was on another island. I had his cell phone number, so I could call him at any point in time and we could talk through a case and get the dog the care that he needed. So we're definitely very good at doing that. I think there was one time when I had a military working dog and I had concerns because his spleen looked a little bit big on an x-ray that I took because he had some back pain. So it's like, okay, let's do a quick ultrasound on his spleen, but I had to wait for the veterinary or for the health clinic to have availability for me to use their ultrasound. So of course it was at 5 o'clock on a Friday. And so we get the working dog in, and I shave him and I put the ultrasound on his belly, and his belly is full of fluid. And I found a ruptured mass on his spleen. And I was like, oh my gosh. I don't have surgical capabilities because I didn't have a clinic yet. So I called my boss, who, is hundreds of miles away on another island. We talked through it, and he's like, yeah, that dog needs to get surgery stat. So hang up with them, call another island, the next island over, and say, hey, I got a military working dog that's coming your way. He needs to have his spleen taken out tonight. And so that veterinarian, who is a good friend and also a young captain, and then my commander, who just happened to be, visiting her clinic at the time, took that dog in at 9 o'clock at night on a Friday and did a splenectomy on him. We used telehealth in that capability, but we also worked on medevacing him and just leveraging all the resources that we had to get that dog care.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's a great example. Thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. All right, let me see if I missed anything. Well, you haven't left the military, so I can't ask you what the transition experience was like.
I will say that a lot of veterinarians leave active duty and then decide to go to the reserves. So if they want, they like the mission and they want to continue serving, they can find an open position in the reserves in whatever state that they want to live in, and they can keep serving that way. So.
Yeah, okay. I'm sure that there's plenty of people out there like me who have very little idea of what the military like, but especially being a veterinarian or veterinary support staff. So what is something you think maybe people get wrong about it, or you think would be really nice to tell people about being a veterinary personnel in the military?
I think one of the things that people might get wrong is just thinking that we're only treating animals, and that if you're good with animals, then you'd be good as a veterinarian or good in the Army. Unfortunately, as much as we would love for our job to be 100% treating working dogs all the time, that seems like a small percentage of what we do. In the Army, they always say that we are leaders first and we are soldiers first. So everything that another soldier is expected to be able to do, I'm expected to be able to do that as well. So I have to be able to pass the combat fitness test. I have to be able to fire a weapon. I have to be able to do all those warrior tasks. I also have to be able to work with other people, to be able to lead my team, and to make sure that we're all accomplishing the mission together and that nobody's getting left behind. That is a really big part of the job. I think the same thing happens in the civilian side as well. You can't be an effective veterinarian if you're not good at engaging with your clients and your owners and your team. So it's a little bit like that, just maybe a little bit more intense, and some of the leadership things that we have to do.
Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for your service. We need all of you, and I do want to give that gratitude out to you and everybody you interact with, because that's huge for us. Before we run out of time, I'll have our final 4 questions, which gets me more about you. So coming back to you, what is something people get wrong about you?
Oh, gosh. Maybe that I have it all together and that I know what I'm doing and that it comes easy. That is definitely not true. I definitely feel like I struggle, especially in the residency that I'm in now. There's a really, really steep learning curve. I try to put the best face forward, and just bring a professional appearance to everything that I do. But underneath the surface, there's definitely a lot of chaos and a lot of self-doubt. But I think that's just natural. And I think a lot of people go through that. So.
Absolutely. And I am glad to hear that you do have some support systems. I was really surprised when you said you have like book club. I'm like, oh, that's fantastic. So
Yeah.
that's good that you do have support, but you're right. That is very, very human. All right. What is a hidden skill or interest that you have?
Ooh, hidden skill or interest. I love math. I think we started out that talking about it, so maybe it's not that hidden. But anytime, we do a lot of reading of journal articles and things like that in my residency. A lot of the times I will just get stuck on the details and be like, oh, that's an equation I've never seen before. And I'll just get my whiteboard out and start working through it so I can understand, how that equation works. And I think that gives me a little bit of a leg up when it comes to reading and interpreting some of the statistical articles that we have.
Oh, now I know who to call when I have a question about stats.
Oh
gosh. What is something on your bucket list?
Ooh, something on my bucket list. Antarctica. Actually, that is one of the reasons why I joined the Army, was because I thought I would be able to get to go to Antarctica. There's one mission every year that they select a veterinary corps officer to support, and it's to support this research installation in Antarctica. And they send you down for a couple of weeks and you do some food inspections and stuff, and then then return home. And so it's like that, I'm going to do that. You even get like a little special medal, if you go down into Antarctica, I think. And so that was something that I really wanted to do. And, the opportunity came up, I think, once in my career to volunteer for it. And I was like raising my hand as high as I possibly could, like, send me, send me, send me. They picked somebody else for it, which was fine, I think, but I'll make it down there as a civilian at some point, though.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay. Well, when you go, you gotta let me know and we'll follow up.
Yeah.
We'll get your story. And finally, what is something you are most grateful for?
I am most grateful for my family. And that is something that I remind myself of daily when, struggling with the residency study hours, and responsibilities. Just reminding myself of how lucky I am to be where I am because of the sacrifices that my family made coming before me, that my dad made when he was in the Air Force, but also just the support that I get from my family now, from my husband and from my daughter, the things that they allow me to do. I'm just so grateful for them, and they bring a light to my life. So.
Another thank you to those who have served in our armed forces. I hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Vet Life Reimagined podcast. Please check out the videos on YouTube. I have it all organized with vets, vet tech, students, shorts. It's a great way to check out all the people and the topics that are covered. While you're there, it would mean a lot to make sure that you are subscribed. And to you, my audio listener, I appreciate that you are here with me. Please click the follow sign. And if you like the podcast, please give it a great rating and review. That really helps out the podcast. I will be here next week. Have a wonderful week.